So how many, then you got out to the East Coast, how many deployments did you do out there?
I bounced back and forth from Iraq to Afghanistan for basically 4 years straight. Everything between 3 to 4 months. They were shorter in duration. So I ended up, in my career, I've been to Iraq 3 times and Afghanistan 5.
And at one point there, you kind of got a little setback.
Yeah. I equate it to going to Vegas, and you can play craps for a really long time, and you can be on a great heater, and then a 7's going to come up and bite you, and hopefully you don't have a lot of chips on the table. Yeah, I got shot from about 15 feet away by a guy in a window that I didn't see, and I was staring at that window for 10 minutes before I was sitting on a ladder looking into a courtyard where they were trying to determine which building was the one that we were actually going to make entry on. And they determined that the building that I was looking at was the one we were going to make entry into. I'm actually going to back it up a little bit. So we walked by this building originally. The lights were off because I was walking point at the time. So we went down an alley. We're not always the best ninjas. We made a little bit of noise. So a guy comes out of a house. We pursued him into the house and made additional noise while we were doing that, securing that to make sure that maybe it wasn't the guy. We weren't exactly positive of the location, so maybe that could have been the guy. So it wasn't, and we backtracked and went back down that alley. And the guys who were they were fixing the target, trying to determine which building it was going to be. They needed some time, so I threw a ladder up on a wall because I'm not a huge fan of not being able to see over things. Climbed up on the ladder and was just looking at the outside of a building. And the lights were on this time, which defeats a lot of the technological advantage that I have. So I was kind of just looking underneath my nods, and I could see plainly into the window. I never saw a shadow. I never saw a curtain move. I never saw anything. And they finally gave me the go-ahead, hopped off the ladder. And I remember being in the corner of the courtyard by myself for a little bit before 2 other guys came over with me. And I almost approached the door on my own because I had before. And it was dark and I had the shadows. And it was kind of like an American house where there's it was like an L. The long end of the L being the garage, and then there's the path that goes to the front door, and then it breaks off, and then there's that window right there. That was the window I was looking at. And I was just going to go to the corner to set security for the breach, and I almost left the shadows. I was like, you know what? Not today. So I waited for 2 more guys to come up, and right at that corner that I was going to post myself up on, there was a window, and I wasn't going to turn my back on the window without taking at least a quick peek in it. And as soon as I turned my head to look in that window, I heard a crack. And the round hit me high up on the hip and spun me. And then this is the only time I've ever felt it in my life, the true sensation of time slowing down. It was almost like the movies. It's probably the only thing I can say was ever like the movies. But it slowed down and spun me towards him. And when it hit, I pushed off a little bit with my right foot, I think just instinctually, kind of pushed me down. And there was a vehicle in the driveway, and I ended up stuck underneath the vehicle. I had a shotgun on my right-hand side, and the bungee cord got stuck on the undercarriage. I'm laying on top of my gun, can't get it, staring at full auto fire from like 15 feet away out of a window. A guy's just up on his knees, just hosing. And probably 3 seconds occurred or expired, and I mean, obviously all hell broke loose from people on our side engaging the window. They made entry from the other side, ended up having, I think it was 8 American servicemen get wounded on that target alone. Some of it was our guys were too close to a breach. I mean, a lot of it was some fog of war stuff from a unit that you wouldn't associate necessarily with the fog of war, but it happens.
I associate the fog of war with all units, unfortunately.
Yeah, but some of them it surprises you at some levels more than others. And it was, they wanted to get internal. They get the breach on the door, So we put a C6 strip charge up, which is a very large explosive charge that runs the length of the door. We put it on the hinge side. And when they set it off, there was a unit that had entered on the other side of the building without telling anybody, standing about 3 feet from it. Oof. So there were some people who were shot on the inside. There were some people who were shot on the outside. And then there were some people who were hurt from the explosion. So they had little birds coming in, grabbing people. I ended up getting thrown in the back of a Bradley with a guy who jabbed me with a 14-gauge needle and hadn't prepped the bag, so he pulled it back out, and I told him at that point, you're done with any medical treatment at this point. I'll handle my own stuff from here on out. Like an Army medic, he was just shaking. I'm like, you're good. I'm going to live, I think. So just take it easy. Take it easy. But, I mean, I didn't do anything differently that night that I hadn't done before, hundreds of times. You know, I was on the wrong side of the bullet, and it actually really rocked my confidence. I was young. I was in my mid-20s, where I wanted to be, operating at the level that I wanted to be operating at. And, I mean, I couldn't walk for almost a year. I had hemiplegia, like paralysis of one side of my leg. I had drop foot for a year.
Is that because it obviously hit nerves then?
They don't know if it – they don't know. It either hit the sciatic nerve as it went through, or the shock wave short-circuited it. Either way, the result was the same. It fried it all the way down to my ankle. So when I was in the back, when I got to the hospital in the green zone, my biggest complaint was that my ankle felt like it was snapped in half. And like, I still have never had a surgery, never broken a bone. Everything is still inside of my pelvis. They just wrapped the wound with ACE wrap and drugged me out of the compound. I mean, that's literally it. And then they went back to business. But I thought that I was like, my ankle's got to be destroyed somehow. So they cut my boot off, like, very gingerly, and they're looking at it and they're like, your ankle's totally fine. But that was by far the worst part of it, was the neuropathic issues. For like a year and a half, almost 2 years, it felt like I had dipped my leg in gasoline and just lit it on fire 24/7. And so the Navy, I mean, I had like 14, 15 pill bottles. I mean, I was taking 2, 3, 4 Ambien, staying awake. Of course, the only way to up that game is to combine it with Captain Morgan, which I did in a variety of dosages. So I would sleep but wake up exhausted. I mean, it was rough. It rocked me as a person and as a SEAL. I didn't know if I was going to ever come back from it.
Where were you stationed at that time? Were you still out on the East Coast, or did you go to Buds?
I was on the East Coast. I went to Buds as basically a break to rehab myself. Right. I mean, like, so even still today, I can't feel my left leg from the kneecap down. I roll my ankle all the time. I'm used to it. I know you
somehow compensate for it the best you can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do any like lateral stuff, because if I catch my left foot to the outside, that's the roll that I can't stop. It's the one at the outside. So, I mean, I still train as hard, if not harder, than I used to. I'm just super cautious with what it is that I do, and I tailor it all towards the stuff that I do now. But yeah, you want to talk about, you know, you watch all these movies where, you know, guys are just getting drilled and they're running at it and like, oh, I'm going to be the biggest warrior ever. And like, I was flat on my back. I mean, I was freaking done training. There's nothing I could do. Pinned under a car, needed a buddy of mine to come over and pull me around in the middle of a firefight to get me out of harm's way. I mean, I got super lucky. The belt I was wearing that night has the second round that the guy shot at me. It burned the belt for like 2 inches, and then the copper jacket is still in the belt itself. That's how close I got to getting hit even higher up in the hip, like the pelvis. I don't think I would have survived that one if that would have hit me, because there's an AK from like 3 times the distance from me to you right now. Yeah. It was spicy.
So when they're just, I mean, I'm not trying to say anything super negative about the care that you got, but they're like, okay, take this pill, take this pill, take this pill, you're in pain, take this pill.
It was early. So I was, I got home about 2 days after it happened. They flew me, they medevaced me to Landstuhl. I decided I didn't want to stay there, so I checked myself out and got a Delta ticket and flew into New York. Got picked up by another plane, and my wife met me at the stairs of the aircraft in Oceana, the Naval Air Station there, with my son in a stroller, and she was pregnant with our second child. And about a week after that, my resting heart rate was sitting at like 150. I was sweating profusely, in a ton of pain, and they take me to the hospital. And I remember talking to like this, I think I was an E5 at the time. So I was talking to this little punk E2 corpsman who was checking me in. And he was like, you know, what's the nature of your injury? And I'm like, you know, gunshot wound to the hip. And I kid you not, he's like writing this stuff down. He stops and he looks at me and he goes, self-inflicted? And my wife's sitting there looking at this. She's just like, what's going on? Like, she has very little understanding of the military medical system. I sat in the waiting room while they took people in with the sniffles and the flu for 4 hours before they took me in. And my wife finally just started losing her mind on them. And like, you know, it was a training hospital, as most military hospitals are. They had never seen a gunshot wound because it was relatively early in the war, you know, given where we were at that time, and they wanted to come have all the doctors, all the residents come in. They're like, hey, can they come in and check out the wound? Like, we'd never seen a gunshot wound. I'm like, sure, if you bring a pint of morphine with you and juice me up first. I don't care what you do. Like, I just couldn't sleep. I was in so much pain. The treatment that I got from the military was not awesome. It was frustrating at the time, but
this is just to make sure, this is 05, right?
05, yeah, early 05. It wasn't awesome. They weren't used to seeing a lot of that stuff. I got pills and I got sent home and kind of largely left to my own devices, which was not a smart call at the time. I mean, I in my career, I felt like I was a race car in fifth gear going around turn 4, and then somebody dumped the tranny into reverse, and there was just pieces everywhere, and I had to kind of put it back together myself, and it sucked at the time. My wife still, I mean, she's pissed about it, the treatment that I got, but I mean, the military did what they were doing at that time. You know, I don't hold them against it or hold it against them at all, but it sucked for sure.
And I do know we've made vast improvements since then.
Huge
you were one of the guys that,
the
reason why there's been so many improvements, because, you know, guys were coming back and getting the kind of treatment that they would definitely deserve better.
You know, one of the worst things about the whole thing was actually the flight out of Balad and a C-141 full of stretchers of people that were wounded far worse than I was. Just the noises that were being made on that flight from Balad to Landstuhl. I was very fortunate. I had a doc who was assigned to me, and I was just like, hey, knock me out right. I don't want to hear this anymore. And I had the guy just basically just juice me up until I fell asleep for the whole flight. But what an experience that you'll never forget. Just a tube full of bleeding Americans, you know, on their way back to try to put their lives back together. People missing. I mean, I was right next to a guy who was standing in a turret of a Humvee when a suicide bomber clacked himself off, and every inch of his body from beltline up was just completely tattered. I mean, another guy who had his legs blown off. I mean, like, I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, I thought I was injured. You guys are way worse off than I am. It was a very sobering experience.
How did you? So you go kind of pretty far down the road of booze and pills. I mean, okay,
I can give you some good recipes if you're interested.
I'm not.
3 blues, a red, 2 bottles of Captain Morgan.
How did you? Okay, we'll take it for granted that you went pretty far down that road, being that, you know, you've got the team guy personality of, okay, I can't do this, so I can't do this to the extreme, so I'm gonna do something else to the extreme.
I have go and stop.
How did you figure out? Okay, you know what? What was the slap in the face that made you say, you know what, this is not where I want to be?
I was in the car with my wife. So one of the pills that they gave me was Neurontin, which is a anti-seizure medicine for children, but it has a secondary or tertiary side effect of neuropathic pain control. It was an attempt to try to get that burning feeling to stop in my leg. And I kept signing waivers for the dosages because we were off the charts. Like, we were making medical history with the dosages that I was on. And another side effect of it is central nervous system suppression. And I remembered going by the gas station and looking at the sign for the prices of the gasoline. And my wife asked me a very rudimentary mathematical problem, and I couldn't figure it out. And I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the world, but like, I should be able to add 2 + 2 and, you know, maybe multiply that out a little bit. And I couldn't do it, and I recognized that in and of myself. So that night I stopped drinking and basically started weaning myself off of the Neurontin, because you can't stop it cold turkey, because if you do, your propensity for seizures goes through the roof. So you got to graduate yourself out of it. So it took me like 6 to 8 months to get myself off of the Neurontin, off all the pills, and I just started working out like a maniac. And that's how I got myself. I did it all on my own. I didn't get on any protocol from the Navy, but I remember that moment where I just couldn't answer that question. I was like, okay, time to shift course.
And you know, a lot of people ask about, you know, when you're injured, they ask me, you're injured, what do you do? And I always say, hey, I do what I can do. If I got a blown out knee, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do one-legged squats, the other leg, I'm going to do pull-ups. Was that your attitude? Was like, okay, 100%. What can I do? You know,
that's how I found CrossFit, was through getting shot. That's what I used to, and again, I could care less. People get very excited about the term CrossFit, functional training, whatever you want to call it. to me, it was really new at that time. Like I was on the bodybuilder routine, chest and tris and back and bis. And
the 90s team guy routine.
Totally.
Or otherwise known as the Echo routine.
Or you run on Wednesdays. But yeah, so and I had never done the squats before. So I literally held onto a pole and lowered myself down into a squat, and I picked myself up, and I just changed stuff so I could do it. And I remember the first night of sleep that I had that was really good, and my wife could probably point to it on a calendar, because I came back from the gym I had no responsibilities at work because my squad room was still deployed. So I literally was like, hey, come in on Thursdays and we'll give you some E-stem on your leg. Right. That was the therapy. So I went into the gym and I just crushed myself. Came home covered in sweat and just passed out. Slept good and just continued that routine on. And they were saying it would take me a couple of years, if ever, to get back on full active duty, because they didn't know. Because with nerves, they're like, you reach the end of the medical practice when you start talking about nerves. I've never had, the doctors with probably a decade of medical experience is saying to me, I don't know. Yep. I'm like, hey, doc, I don't have an MD, and I can tell you that I don't know. Could I get a better answer out of you than that? Come on, man. But yeah, I worked myself back. I wasn't done. I didn't want to be done. And I worked myself back to a point where I felt confident again that I could deploy, and I was still continuing. So I left and went to Buds in 2006 as an instructor, used that time to rehab myself. And then by the time I got to Team 3, it was about 4 or 5 years after that injury where I was going through training when you were the OIC to trade at.
And also you became an officer at that point when you were going to Buds.
I did. I didn't have it's not that I didn't have a choice. It was the best choice that I had at that time. So when I got shot, I was on my LPO tour. Mm-hmm. And for people who don't understand the military, it is a mandatory go, no-go wicket for advancement. And they counted it as me not successfully completing it. So to advance, I was an E6 at the time, and I was trying to walk the ladder.
I'm sorry for laughing. For those of you that think I'm an evil bastard because I'm laughing, I'm not laughing because I'm laughing at the ridiculousness of the system.
So if you want to march your way from E1 to E9, you have to hit these mandatory career wickets, and the jump between E6 to E7 for the enlisted guys is the large jump from middle management to the C-suite of the enlisted realm. They judge you only by your service record. Unless you have these mandatory wickets, you're getting swept off the table. And so I submitted my chief package twice with a good, awesome evaluations. I was doing some awesome stuff in my career. I had good awards, good recommendations, good evals from everybody. And 2 years in a row, they're like, nope. And so finally I started calling people who probably shouldn't have told me the answer. I'm like, hey, what's going on there? And they're like, oh, your LPO tour is getting counted against you. And I didn't, I didn't want to be done with being in the military. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, what can I do here if I want to continue on and I want to have impact? So I decided I needed to maneuver. So I researched officer programs and stumbled across the limited duty officer program, which is traditionally for E7, E8s, and E9s. And there had never been an E6 candidate picked up. And so I threw my package in the next year that it came up and was actually selected first out of the whole stable of people that were selected that year, ahead of 5 or 6 other chiefs who ended up getting picked up for LDO. But for me, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I want to stay in and I want to have an impact. This is the only way that I can do it. So that's why I submitted my officer package. It was never any burning desire of mine from years before that. It was just that I need to do something to keep moving, and that was my route to do it.
Did you, when you were